When Walt Disney World opened on October 1st, 1971, general admission to Magic Kingdom was $3.50, and that price didn't include the rides. You bought those separately with coupon books. The $5.75 book covered transportation plus 11 attractions, which was the realistic cost of an actual full day. Adjusted for inflation, that works out to somewhere around $45 in today's money. In 2026, the cheapest single-day ticket at Disney World starts at $119, and on a peak date at Magic Kingdom, it hits $209. That price includes no line skipping, no parking, and no food. Inflation explains part of that gap. The rest of it is a deliberate strategy, built over about 15 years, that the company has never really hidden, and figuring out who is actually responsible for it turns out to be messier than pointing at a corporation and calling it greed. Inflation deserves a fair hearing before we set it aside, because it does account for a real portion of what happened here. A 2024 study by FinanceBuzz compared a decade of Disney World pricing against Bureau of Labor Statistics data, and found that general consumer inflation in the United States ran about 32% between 2014 and 2024. Over that exact same window, the cheapest possible Disney World ticket rose 21%. That is below inflation, and it is what the company's defenders reach for first. The problem is what happened at the opposite end of the identical product. The most expensive peak date ticket rose 91% across those same 10 years. Both numbers describe the same admission, sold at the same gate, differing only by which square of the calendar you walked through it on. What Disney did was stretch the price of admission across the year. The floor stayed low enough to keep quoting in marketing materials, and the ceiling climbed as far as demand would carry it. Date-based pricing arrived in 2018, sold to guests as a way of rewarding flexible travelers, and for a stretch of time, it worked that way. It also handed the company hundreds of individual pricing levers where there had been one, and every October since, those levers have moved the same direction on the dates families are actually able to travel. In late 2025, the ceiling crossed $200 for the first time in company history. The longer historical record makes the shift even clearer. Go Banking Rates ran Magic Kingdom admission prices through the Bureau of Labor Statistics inflation calculator using ticket data compiled by all ears and adjusted into 2017 dollars. A one-day ticket sat between roughly $57 and $67 for the entire stretch from 1986 through 2001. 15 straight years of real terms stability. Disney has raised the price more than 4 dozen separate times since 1971 by all ears count, but for most of that history, the increases tracked the broader economy closely enough that a family's actual burden barely moved. The divergence is recent, and it accelerated hard after 2019. A 2024 Wall Street Journal analysis put the rise in the typical cost of a Disney World vacation at nearly 40% faster than inflation since that year. And crucially, that measurement covers the entire trip rather than the ticket. The distance between those two figures is where the actual story lives. It also explains why arguments about Disney pricing go in circles. One person points at the $119 starting ticket and calls the parks reasonable. Another points at a $209 peak day and a 5-figure trip total. Both are reading real numbers off opposite ends of a spread Disney spent a decade pulling apart on purpose. Running the arithmetic on a single modern park day makes all of that concrete. 4 peak date Magic Kingdom tickets in 2026 at $209 each come to $836 before Florida's 6.5% sales tax. Parking adds another $35. If that family wants Lightning Lane Multipass so they are not standing in 70-minute standby queues all day, that is another $60 to $156 depending on the date. Seven Dwarfs Mine Train and Tron sit outside Multipass entirely, so either one costs extra again on top of that. Before anyone has eaten a single thing, the day has cleared $1,000. Park Hopper, once a modest add-on, now runs between roughly $198 and $264 across a full ticket in 2026, with Park Hopper Plus reaching about $290. Children were never insulated from this either. In 2014, a one-day child ticket for ages 3 to 9 ran between $88 and $93. By 2025, that range had widened to between $114 and $194, roughly 29% at the bottom and more than 100% at the top. LendingTree found a Disney World resort room for 2 adults and 2 children could reach $1,079 per night. None of this arithmetic is hidden. It is all published on Disney's own website. It is just distributed across enough separate purchase decisions at enough different points in the booking process that almost nobody assembles the total until the credit card statements arrive. Food is where the increases get hardest to defend on any grounds. That same FinanceBuzz study found in-park food and beverage prices had risen 61% on average across the decade, roughly double general inflation and outpacing even the average ticket increase. Every item they tracked had gone up by at least $1.50, most by $2 or more. The bread service at Sanaa over at Animal Kingdom Lodge climbed from $9.99 to $22. Corn dog nuggets at Casey's Corner went from $4.99 to nearly $11. The Mickey Mouse ice cream bar rose 63%, the Dole Whip 58%, churros 54%. Mickey waffles were the one item under inflation at 30%, a strange consolation prize when everything beside them on the menu accelerated. Labor, produce, and utility costs did rise across the whole Orlando market, and that pressure was real. Every restaurant along International Drive absorbed the same input inflation Disney did. Very few of them doubled their menu prices. The difference is structural, because the moment you scan your ticket, there is no competing vendor inside the berm. Leaving for lunch and coming back burns 90 minutes of a day you already paid several $100s for. That is a captive market in the most literal sense, and it prices accordingly. Mobile ordering made it easier still, since a menu on a phone screen can be repriced overnight without anyone reprinting a board. Even the dining plan, which families buy to make food costs predictable, rose again for 2026. Adding roughly $1.30 per adult per day on the quick service tier, and about $1.45 per child. On its own, that is nothing. Multiplied across a party of 5 over 6 nights, it is one more line item nobody planned for. The upsell architecture is where the modern pricing model really lives, and nearly every piece of it exists because something free was removed first. Complimentary Magic Bands ended for new reservations starting January 1st, 2021. Magical Express, the free airport transfer that also collected your luggage and delivered it to your room while you were already in a park, ran its final arrivals at the end of that year. FastPass Plus, which let every guest holding a ticket book 3 ride reservations 60 days in advance at no cost whatsoever, was retired and came back as a paid product. Extra Magic Hours became a tiered benefit split by resort category, and in October of 2025, Disney removed discounted pre-arrival Magic Band Plus pricing for resort guests and pass holders, one of the last small perks still attached to booking on property. What replaced that free system is 3 separate paid tiers that most guests find difficult to keep straight. Lightning Lane Multipass runs roughly $15 to $39 per person per day, depending on park and date. Lightning Lane Single Pass, which covers the headliner attractions deliberately excluded from Multipass, costs about $12 to $24 per person per attraction on top of that. And Lightning Lane Premier Pass, which covers every eligible attraction in a park at once, has ranged from around $119 on a slow day at Animal Kingdom up to $449 per person at Magic Kingdom during spring break. That is per person, per park, per day, on top of a ticket that already cost up to $209. Then there is everything orbiting the rides. That parking charge rose from $30 in 2026, a roughly 17% jump, and the single largest percentage increase on any Disney World line item that year. Preferred parking runs $50 to $60 by season. Memory Maker, which unlocks the photos you already stopped and posed for, costs $185 in advance, or $210 once you are inside the gates. Separately ticketed events sit on top of all that, and they are the clearest version of the strategy. Disney After Hours gives you 3 additional hours inside a park with a limited guest count and much shorter waits. And for 2026, it cost $175 to $199 per person at Magic Kingdom, $155 to $189 at Hollywood Studios, and $155 to $179 at Epcot, with no passholder or Disney Vacation Club discount at Magic Kingdom at all. What you are buying is the park as it used to feel on an ordinary day, sold back to you at a premium, after the daytime version got crowded enough to make that premium make sense. The people who visit most often absorbed their own version of this. In October of 2025, Disney World raised annual pass prices across all 4 tiers, pushing the top level IncrediPass past $1,600 and lifting even the heavily blocked out Pixie Dust Pass, which only admits holders on weekdays, to roughly $499. The pass structure itself functions as a yield instrument, because each descending tier trades a lower price for a longer list of dates you are forbidden from entering. Florida residents and repeat visitors, the guests who fill the parks on ordinary Tuesdays in September and buy relatively little while there, have been steadily priced and blocked toward the margins of the calendar. A pass holder who visits 40 times a year and buys 1 churro spreads a fixed annual fee across 40 days of operating cost. A family flying in from Ohio spends more in 5 days than that pass holder does in 12 months. Disney has been explicit with investors that per capita spending is the metric that matters. And by that measurement, the pass holder is the worst performing guest in the park. The most credible defense Disney offers against all of this is that the money is going back into the parks. And that defense has real numbers standing behind it. In September of 2023, the company announced plans to spend roughly $60 billion on its experiences segment over about 10 years, nearly doubling what it had spent across the previous decade. Josh D'Amaro, who ran that division at the time, later specified that around 70% would go toward new capacity across the domestic parks, the international parks, and the cruise line, with the remaining 30% covering technology, infrastructure, and maintenance. That is a serious commitment, and the results are visible from the walkways. Disney is simultaneously building a Cars expansion at Magic Kingdom, Tropical Americas at Animal Kingdom, a Monsters Inc. land at Hollywood Studios, and multiple new cruise ships. Construction on that scale costs an enormous amount, and somebody has to pay for it. The trouble with the argument is chronology. Paid line skipping arrived at Disney World in October 2021, when Genie Plus launched, nearly 2 full years before the $60 billion figure was announced to anybody. Date-based pricing, the end of free Magic Bands, and the end of Magical Express all predate it as well. The entire architecture that makes a Disney World trip expensive was assembled, tested, and generating revenue well before the construction spending was ever committed. The capital plan is a reason those prices will stay high for the next decade. It is not the reason they got there in the first place. And during the same fiscal year Disney was funding all of that construction, the company told investors it was targeting at least $8 billion in share repurchases, raised from a previously announced $7 billion. That is capital handed back to shareholders rather than poured into concrete. In a year, the company was guiding toward roughly 12% adjusted earnings growth. Which brings us to the financial model, and to the single set of numbers that explains why almost none of this is likely to reverse on its own. On May 6th, 2026, Disney reported results for the quarter ending March 28th. Attendance at its domestic parks had fallen 1% against the same quarter a year earlier. Per capita spending at those same parks was up 5%, driven by admissions, food and beverage, and merchandise. Experiences revenue came in at $9.49 billion, up 7% year over year, with segment operating income of $2.62 billion, which works out to an operating margin just under 28%. Fewer people came through the gates, and the division still posted a record quarter. The pattern held in the quarter before it, when domestic attendance rose 1%, while per capita spending climbed 4%. When a business grows while its attendance shrinks, no internal mechanism exists that forces anybody to reconsider pricing. Disney's CFO, Hugh Johnston, told CNBC that quarter that the company continued to see a strong consumer, with no evidence of a pullback despite fuel prices climbing. He was not spinning anything. From where he sits, that is exactly what the data says. And in March of 2026, Josh D'Amaro took over as chief executive of the Walt Disney Company, succeeding Bob Iger, who stayed on as senior advisor through the end of the year. D'Amaro had spent the previous 6 years running Disney Experiences, the segment that built and refined every pricing mechanism described so far, across a business generating about $36 billion in revenue in fiscal 2025, with roughly 185,000 employees worldwide. The executive who architected the model was promoted to run the whole company on the strength of how well it performed. So that leaves one last group, and it is the uncomfortable one because it is us. In 2024, LendingTree surveyed more than 2,000 American consumers about Disney trips and found that 24% of park-goers had taken on debt to pay for one, up from 18% when the same question was asked 2 years earlier. Among parents with children under 18, the figure was 45%, carrying an average balance of $1,983, the highest of any demographic in the study, and up from 30% in 2022. 83% of those parents took the debt on within the previous 5 years, and 35% within the previous 12 months alone. The detail that matters most is where the budgets actually broke. 65% of indebted respondents named in-park food and beverage as the expense that blew past what they had planned for, ahead of transportation at 48% and hotel accommodations at 47%. These were families who researched ticket prices, saved for ticket prices, and then got taken apart by everything the ticket did not cover. And then there is the number Disney cares about more than any other figure in that entire survey. 59% of those parents said they had no regrets, and 90% described the trip as a treat rather than an obligation. A normal consumer business learns it has overpriced when customers stop coming back. Disney World largely sells a trip families take once every 5 or 10 years, or once ever, planned around the narrow window when a child is the right age to remember it. There is almost no repeat purchase feedback loop to punish a price increase, because by the time a family might reconsider, their kids have aged out and a new set of families has entered with no memory of what any of it used to cost. If there is a ceiling to all of this, we may be watching the first edge of it right now. Disney's published prices kept climbing into 2026, but what families actually paid started moving in the opposite direction, because the company began covering the calendar in discounts. Kids Eat Free ran all of 2026 for guests at Disney-owned hotels. A buy 4, get 2 free offer added 2 free nights and 2 free park days to qualifying summer bookings. Room discounts reached up to 30% for the general public, 35% for Florida residents, and 40% for annual pass holders. Deep discounted rooms were advertised starting at $99 a night. Florida resident tickets landed at roughly $65 a day for summer and fall. Free dining returned for the back half of the year, carrying October arrival dates for the first time in roughly a decade. At one point, the Disney Tourist blog counted 18 separate offers live on DisneyWorld.com at once, and noted the right combination could produce the cheapest Walt Disney World summer trip since 2018 or 2019. A company with unquestioned pricing power does not stack 18 discounts. It charges the price and lets people book it. And the competition finally has real teeth for the first time in the resort's history. Universal's Epic Universe opened in 2025, and by 2026, Universal was selling multi-day passes covering all 4 of its Orlando parks at roughly $65 to $75 per day, against a single peak day at Magic Kingdom running $209. Orlando as a tourism market set records over that same stretch, while Disney's domestic attendance stayed flat or slipped, which suggests visitors are still arriving in Central Florida, They are just distributing themselves differently once they land. The honest answer to who is to blame is that no single party is. And that is exactly what makes it so difficult to fix. Inflation supplied cover for increases that ran well past it. The construction spending supplied a justification that arrived years after the model was already switched on. Guest willingness supplied the proof that it worked. And the once-a-decade nature of the trip removed the feedback that would normally correct a business that pushed too far. What Disney has assembled measures success in dollars per guest rather than in guests. And by that measurement, it is performing better than it ever has. The risk is one that will not appear on any quarterly report for a very long time. A Disney World trip has always functioned as an inherited habit, handed down from parents who went as children to kids of their own. In that same LendingTree survey, a quarter of the people asked had never been to a Disney park at all, and 3 out of 5 gave the same reason, which was that it cost too much. Price a generation out of that habit, and nothing appears to break right away. Attendance holds, spending per guest climbs, the margins look outstanding on every slide. The damage shows up 20 years later, when the parents who never got to go have no particular reason to take their own children. That is a bill no current executive will ever have to pay, which is exactly why it keeps getting run up. Anyway, thanks for sticking with me through the whole thing. I know this one got pretty heavy on numbers in a few spots. If you've got a few more minutes, there's another one of my videos on screen right now that you might get something out of. And I'm still sitting under 1,000 subscribers, which is the point where YouTube actually starts paying out any ad revenue. So anything that moves that number helps a lot more than you'd probably think.